Hey friends, welcome to the Abide in Christ full tutorial. So if you purchase a kit, these will be the things that are inside your kit. You should have a hoop stand, felt backing, a needle, your fabric, floss, a pin, and then these 3 pieces of paper, which is your pattern, a stitch guide, and a little QR code that I can't get out, that if you scan with your phone will take you to the digital guide that will tell you a bunch of information that will pretty much be covered in these videos, but in case you want to have kind of a written form, that would be the place to go. So to start out, you need your fabric and your hoop. You're going to open up your fabric and you will have 2 pieces here. And it might be hard, depending on the light that you're in, it might be hard to see the 2 different pieces, but the slightly smaller circle is your like extra fabric. And then the larger circle, which is a little more off point, is your stitching fabric. So this will be a thin fabric that we won't draw on, but it will be in our hoop as we're stitching. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. So for right now, we're just going to be dealing with our stitching fabric. You're going to get your embroidery hoop and you're going to open it up and put it in 2 different pieces. The piece that does not have the screw on it, you're going to put it underneath your fabric and you're going to want to center it there. And then you're going to put this top piece with the screw on it right back on top. A little hard sometimes when you're doing it on a hard surface. Okay, so it's on there now. We're going to screw this just a little bit, not too much, and then we're going to slowly tighten all the way around the edges. And I like to tighten kind of both the left and right at the same time, so I'm not pulling too hard on the right or pulling too hard on the left, but try and do it evenly as much as possible. And I do find this a little bit easier if you hold it against your chest or your belly and then do it, rather than, you know, right in the middle of the air like I'm doing for a video. So you're going to tighten it a little bit more and just do the same process. We're just trying to get our fabric as tight as possible, and this is super crucial for stitching and for tracing. Okay, let's see how much more tightener I can get it. Okay, once you feel like your fabric is not moving at all anymore, that's when you know that you have it tight enough. That, and when you do this, it should sound like a nice drum. All right, so what we're going to do next is grab your pattern and you're going to turn it over. No, it will not make anything backwards. You're going to turn the fabric back over again when we start stitching, but we're going to turn it over and we're going to tape it onto our hoop. So I can get my tape. And if you find it, if you find it would be easier to cut this a little bit more so you're a little bit closer to the pattern so you have more room to tape, you can do that too. Make sure it's even. Sorry, I'm looking at the sunlight coming through it. Okay, so it looks like everything's inside the circle, and it doesn't have to be perfectly centered in here because we will move our fabric a little bit more in a second, but for the most part you want it centered in your hoop. Okay, so at this point you could probably see it well enough to start tracing, but you could also use a light table or a window. I'll show you a light table in a second, but if you want to use a window, what you do is you would keep it taped here and then just put it flat against a window. I can't really show you so much. You can kind of see with the light coming in, and you might be able to see it a little bit better than flat against a table. Another option is a light table. Whoop. Too many moving pieces, guys. Okay. A light table. That took me a minute. And then you might be able to see it a little bit better. Okay, so I decided to cut that paper a little bit just because it was getting a little bit difficult to tape it to this side. So now with your pin, which opens that way, a lot of people try and do it from that very tip and they're like, my pin's broken, I can't get it open. It's from this little clear plastic part right here. Now we're going to trace. Tracing is super simple, but take your time. The biggest thing is you just want to move slow because these are the markings that you're going to be following as you're stitching. So if you go too fast and you're making markings that are incorrect, then your stitching is going to be incorrect, and we don't want that. So take your time, do it slowly. One tip I would like to tell you is with this box, I prefer, instead of drawing the straight lines, making a mark at each corner. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. And this is because that stitch is actually a straight stitch, which is just one long stitch. And in this corner, there's a leaf kind of covering where the corner is. So you're just gonna kind of guess right where that corner is. This is a straight stitch. And so you're not necessarily following those lines, so you don't really need them there. So after I've done that, I'm gonna slowly start tracing everything else. So a few things to point out to y'all about some of the things I did while tracing. I didn't want to try and talk while tracing because it just doesn't always work very well for me. With these woven wheels, you don't really have to trace that outside circle because it's not where you're making a stitch. I normally just use that when designing just to help me kind of know how big these flowers are going to be. So don't worry about tracing that outside circle. Another thing you might have noticed is I tried to trace in like stitches. So I did my woven wheels first, then I did the lavender, then I did the little daisies, and I tried to keep only tracing the things that were similar at a time, just so that it kind of kept my hand motion doing the same thing and I wasn't kind of going all over the place. One other thing to note, I've got to think about it, were these flowers right here. I just kind of did dots. That will be the outline of it, of how big I'm going to go with those French knots. So those are a few things that you needed to know about the tracing. All right, now once you know you have traced everything and it is safe to take your backing off, or not your backing, but your pattern off, you can take that off. And you're going to turn your piece over this way and you're going to loosen it up. Okay, so now we want to grab that second piece of fabric that we put aside. Where did I put mine? Okay, it was under my light table. All right, so now we're gonna kind of do the similar thing that we did before when we prepared our hoop, is we're gonna put this white, the bright white piece of fabric laying down first. Then we're gonna put the pattern we just traced right on top of that. And you can kind of use your fingers to kind of see where the design is within your hoop. And of course you have kind of the markings from where it was just inside of the hoop at too. So make sure you have that centered. And then you're gonna put this back on. And you're going to do the same thing again. Tighten a little, pull all the way around the edges. It's much harder to do with it floating in the middle than against my belly. Okay, tighten again, go all the way around. And you want to make sure when you're pulling both pieces of fabric, because you don't want to be leaving this white piece loose in the back. Okay, and again, this doesn't have to be perfectly centered. You want to be centered enough so that you can reach all the pieces on the edge, like be able to stitch them and they're not getting hit by the hoop. But you're going to be taking it out of this hoop, so you don't need to worry about it being so perfectly centered that you're unhappy with the piece. Like for example, you can see that my little nut right here is off centered a little bit. So there you go. You are ready now to start stitching.